Don't want to give away too much.
Not too many spoilers. Okay. Yeah, today we have a pretty interesting webinar about KPIs, what you should measure and why it matters. It's a pretty interesting one, as everybody knows that they are important. Most everybody uses them, and not a lot is really spoken about how to improve them or to question which ones you're actually using. So this webinar is supposed to shed some light on that, give you some food for thought in your own KPIs for pricing and revenue management. And looking forward to this session, which I think will be super insightful. And we have some interesting case studies that we brought along as well. So Ingo, if you want to go to the next slide, just a quick intro on our moderator today, as always, Dr. Ingo Reinhardt, co-founder of Buynomics and the inventor of the Buynomics method. Has a long experience in pricing and revenue management, and will be kind of giving the short webinar here today. And I'm Paul, I'm head of sales at Buynomics, leading content insight. I'm also the first person to speak to if you want to work with us. So feel free to shoot me an email or send me a message here in the chat if you're interested. Again, I was logged in under the wrong name, but the name's the same, and you can just find me here. If we go to the next page, we can just explain a little bit what we're doing at Buynomics. If you don't know us, Buynomics is a AI-powered cloud software which helps you make better, faster, more accurate decisions about your pricing and RGM. And it's really around the four key value pillars: our holistic approach, predictive accuracy, speed to insights, and all this resulting in higher profitability. We'll see some of that in practice in this session today. And if you go to the next slide, we can also see that we're working with brands really around the globe and looking to, of course, partner with more and more clients in the next year. So let us know if you are interested in working with us, and reach out here in the chat or by email. So let's go to the next page, Ingo. I think we have some questions prepared for today. So having given a bit of the context about KPIs, thought it'd be interesting to actually ask the audience a little bit how many KPIs you actually measure regularly. So I'm just going to launch this poll. You guys should see it now, and we can see some answers trickling in. It's either you don't measure anything because you don't work in pricing, or you just don't do any of that. You measure 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or more than 10. And we just kind of want to get a feel for whether people are leaning more towards fewer, high quality, easy or simple to understand KPIs, or is it more, the granularity that people on average look at. So we have a lot of people already chiming in here. I'll give it like 2 more seconds for everyone to make a decision here, and then I'll close the poll. And let's see if we can share the results now. So the results should be on your screen now. Ingo, what do you think? I'm actually not too surprised.
No, it's what I expected. I can see him. Hope everyone else can.
So the majority of you actually measure about 1 to 5 KPIs, and only very few actually measure more than 10. So it is kind of that mix between, that balance between having, I guess, the simplicity and the rigor of the KPIs that you measure. But very interesting to see that the majority of people, if we also count people that didn't answer, that the vast majority actually measures only 1 to 5 KPIs. So that's quite interesting, I think. And we'll see through that webinar whether and how that makes sense. So we have another question for you, also just to get a feel for, yeah, how are you looking at your own KPIs? How do you actually feel about them? And I'll launch the question now. So the question is, how confident are you that you're measuring the right thing? So are you actually measuring the right KPIs? So are you very confident? Have you tested this? Are you neutral about this? Or are you like neither sure or unsure? Are you somewhat unsure? Do you have like a feeling that you don't really measure the right things, or are you actually very unsure that you're measuring the right things? So let's see, we have a lot of answers already. I'll just give you guys 5 more seconds to answer, and then we can publish the poll here. There's definitely a clear winner. So I'll end the poll and share the results. So yeah, the majority of people says they're somewhat confident. So I guess it's we also have a webinar on behavioral effects, but I guess people tend to not want to choose the real extremes. So nobody wants to, or few people are actually very confident and few people are very unsure. But it's good to see that at least the majority of people are confident or very confident in their KPIs, and probably with very good reason. So we hope that we can either boost that confidence or also give you some food for thought in today's session. And quite interesting to see that picture here. Ingo, are you surprised by the answers, or is it also?
No, I think that's what I expected. And I think we had a while ago a similar webinar with results that are in line with these. So this I think that makes a lot of sense. Somewhat confident in measuring 1 to 5 numbers. I think that's also reflects what I've seen in my previous life as a consultant. What makes sense in most cases. All right, should we?
Yeah, I'll let you take it from here.
Perfect.
I'll be available for everyone in the Q&A. So if you have any questions during the chat, just ask them in the Q&A or ask them in the chat here, and I'll be at your disposal.
Perfect. So thanks also hi from my side. As Paul said, I'm Ingo Reinhardt, co-founder of Buynomics, deeply involved in all the tools that we're building, the method and everything around that. And I think KPIs are, I think, an important topic for all of us, I would say, for obvious reason. Only what measures, or it's important to measure what matters, and only the things that get measured also get done. I think that's very straightforward, but there are a number of difficult challenges that most of us probably have already encountered when actually defining KPIs, working with KPIs, and then using them in practice. And this is essentially what we want to discuss today. Obviously, within half an hour, we can't conclusively deal with the topic, but as Paul said, we want to give some food for thought, go through the main ideas, also share a framework. I think we'll send out the slides afterwards so that you can take a deeper look at that. We won't go into all the details, obviously, in the session, but for us, it's important that we bring across the key ideas that are important to us. And I think just to get started, obviously, maybe that's when we look at the webinars from our side, of course, there are also some KPIs that are important to us. Obviously, it's the number of participants, so we like to speak to a large audience. And I think the other important thing is engagement. So we like if you ask questions that we can discuss towards the end of the session. And also, as a measure of engagement, we always look at the number of people that drop out. This is obviously something that we want to minimize throughout the webinar. So if you have anything you want to discuss, an idea, or need some clarification on some topic, please write it in the chat and we'll answer that towards the end of the session. All right, so having established that, let's start with, before we go into the topic of pricing, into something that's really important, and I think it typically goes by the name of the Cobra effect, and it it touches the field of what can go wrong if you're measuring the wrong things. And the Cobra effect comes from the story that back when the British ruled in India, they had the issue of there being too many cobras in an area, and to get rid of the cobras, they had the idea that they paid the people if they brought them cobras, and the idea obviously was that they would go around, collect them, and bring them, and that would solve the problem. But what really happened is that people started breeding cobras and selling the cobras that they bred. And obviously that didn't solve the problem. And when the British discovered that that was going on, what they did is they stopped the practice, which led as a result, led to people releasing the cobras that they had bred, and in the end, increasing the problem. So I think this is a very graphic problem. Similar situations we have here with us are in the 19th century, the US Congress wanted to build a large rail network, and they paid companies by the length or the mileage of the tracks, and then companies started building detours, long curves and everything to extend the length of the track. Another example, more recent, well, it's Fargo. They thought that they needed to have more customers, and which led to the fact, because they incentivized this, that teams were increasing the number of customers massively with fake accounts. I think also that's something important currently in the Twitter discussion. So it's always important to make sure that you're looking at the right numbers, you have the right KPIs, and that they're really in line with what you want to achieve in the end. Well, this didn't directly have anything to do with pricing, but I think it's, when we look more closely at our topic, we have some very similar cases where, and I've seen this in practice, people are using the wrong KPIs to steer pricing. And one thing I've seen quite a few times is something like where in a sales organization, maybe more in a B2B context, where the sales reps set their individual prices. What often they get incentivized by what price they're able to implement with their customers, with the idea that those sales reps that are able to implement a higher price get higher rewards. But the highest price obviously doesn't always have to be the best price. And in the example we have here, so these three people, or these three cases, they sell at different selling prices. The first one at 100, the middle one at 90, and the one on the right at 80. But depending on the average selling price that they offer, they have different success rates between 50 and 90%. And if then we look in the end at the profit generated by these three prices, we see that the 80 euro, in this case, the lowest price, offers the highest profit, and then incentivizing sales reps to go for 100 would not be correct. So it's in this case, it would be a missteering of the team if they're incentivized by increasing their price or aiming for the highest price. Similar cases are, for example, and I've also seen this in many contexts, that teams aimed to increase their percentage margin for their products. So, and they said it's a success if we go from 60 to 62% margin. Obviously, that can always be done by increasing the price, but this might not be the right margin. So it might be, depending on price elasticity in the case, how customers react. Can the increase of the margin from 60 to 62% reduce profits? And that wouldn't be the right thing. Another thing is, for example, is incentivizing a sales team by what share of deals they close. Obviously, it's easier to close a deal at a lower price, and this can often lead to lower prices. And as in the example here on the left side that we showed, it's always important to understand what price brings the best profit. So just incentivizing teams or measuring how you increase prices, how you increase the number of deals you close, how you increase the margin that you achieve wouldn't be the right thing. What's important in pricing is and I think that's where it always starts, is that in the end, what we want to achieve, be it profit, revenue, market share, pricing is at its core, I think, very, very simple in what needs to be achieved. But what is difficult is understanding how that goal, profit maximization, revenue maximization, for example, how they are linked to specific actions. So what price leads to the best profit, what price leads to the best revenue, and so on. So these factors need to be understood, and they also need to be understood in the context of the strategy of the company. So for example, right now, when you look closely at the stock markets, what we're seeing at the moment, or what we've seen in the past months, is a shift in importance from growth to profit. So companies, beginning of the year, they were highly rewarded for high growth. So technology stocks, for example, whereas now consumer goods companies are more in favor, that have probably less growth, but are more profitable. So there are also these capital market strategic aspects that are important to consider, but always, I think at the core of pricing, it's very simple: profit, revenue, or a mixture of the both. But what's difficult is then how to achieve that. And to achieve that, it's important to understand the dynamics. How do, for example, price changes, product changes, and so on affect the profit, or affect first sales volumes and then revenue and profit. And this is a bit what we want to talk about here. All right, before we do that, and I already spoke on the first issue a bit, is I think there are two things are important in the context of KPIs. The first one is, should we measure actions or results? As I said, results are what we had on the previous slide, things like revenue, market share, profit, and so on. And actions are the portfolio that you offer, the prices that you implement, the discounts that you give, how you work with promotions, how you work with trade terms, and all of these things. So these are always the two things. And I think I'll select here these pictures. So it's, if you think about alcohol, so if you want to know how drunk you are, you can either look at how much you drank, or you can look at how well you're still performing an alcohol test. So for example, are you able to walk on a straight line? And similarly in pricing, these two, or this dichotomy evolves around the fact what you do, how do you change prices, products, and so on. And then in the end, what market share, revenue, and profit you get. So this is the one thing. And also when we look at KPIs, in my experience, the second key topic that needs to be decided in an organization is what's more important, absolute performance or improvement in performance. And you always have, particular when you work with the sales team, you have already high performers that show a high performance, but have a low improvement potential because they're already close to their peak. And then you have people with a lower performance, but obviously a much higher improvement potential. So, and the question is, what should be valued more in a company? And this often depends, of course, on the context, but it's important to have, when you think about KPIs, to have an understanding of these two questions here. All right, so let's go into more detail. And to get the KPIs right, I think it's really important that the KPIs that a company looks at are very closely related or aligned with the strategy that the company follows. So for example, if the company follows a strategy of a growth strategy where it wants to conquer new markets, expand rapidly, then it cannot at the same time have a pricing that is focused on margin improvement. So these things have to be aligned. Whereas if the company, or in specific markets, the company has the understanding that it has already reached the proper market share and it now wants to move towards profit maximization, then of course it needs to have the proper KPIs in place to measure how well the company succeeds in achieving this specific goal. So the strategy always determines what KPIs are measured, and then also what type of KPI or what values these KPIs should take. So this is always the starting point, and I can go through this more quickly. As I said, we will be sending out these slides. What we've seen, what works very well in practice, is this framework, this pricing framework here that starts with strategy and objectives at the top. So has an understanding, okay, we want to conquer a certain market, or we want to increase profits from a certain market, and we measure that by certain objectives. We want to increase profit by X%, we want to increase revenue by X%, and so on. So these are the top level goals to achieve typically long-term profit maximization. And to achieve this goal, and this is where the KPIs or the system of KPIs comes into play, the company needs to define also the rest of the pricing framework, which particularly means the price setting, so how to set specific prices, list prices, and so on, and then secondly, how to implement these prices. So how to work when, for example, when you work as a consumer goods manufacturer, you work with retailers, you need to have an understanding of how you implement the prices, what trade terms to apply, what discounts to give. If you're a company that has a sales force that sells to, working in a B2B pricing environment, you need to have an understanding of, if you increase the price by 10%, your list price, how much of that will actually be implemented at the end customer in the end, and not only what you shouldn't only look at to maximize that share, but you should look at the proper implementation rate. It might be that it's best to implement 60 or 70% rather than 80%. This really depends on the context. And lastly, and I think this is often forgotten in many organizations, is that it's also important to have the proper KPIs in place for the pricing organization. So for example, how long does it take to increase the price? How much effort is it? How much manpower or womanpower does it take to increase the price? And how much of the price adjustment is already automated, for example? So let's go through these very high level. As I said, we'll be sending out the slides afterwards. So typical price setting KPIs are the percentage of price increases, total margin changes, revenue, profit increase, and so on. And then in implementation, companies often look at list versus net price increases. So how much is implemented? What are the margin shares? If you are looking at the relationship, for example, between a manufacturer and a retailer, how do they split margins? These are typical KPIs by which their relationship is steered. And lastly, in terms of technology, as already mentioned, the question of what share of the pricing process is automated. Do you only need to say in the beginning, okay, I'm planning to increase prices by 5% on average, and then you have a system that automatically implements that with the proper price increases across different or differentiated price increase across categories and so on. The pricing process, does it take 2 days or half a year to implement a certain price change, and how efficiently is your pricing team working? So these are typical KPIs that companies use to steer the organization and improve the overall process. And let's look at that in 2 specific contexts. So here's a consumer goods company. As I said, the typical overall objective or KPI is long-term profit growth, and specifically implemented in terms of annual profit on net revenue growth, market share, and then within a specific price round, this is usually done by looking at first the implementation. So what's the weighted price increase that we achieved? What is the end customer revenue growth? So that means, so you have an understanding, we want to increase price. In the first step, we want to improve or maximize the overall gross revenue that we can achieve. And then in the implementation part is how do we split that between the manufacturer and the retailer, which takes into account, of course, many things, also on particular the power balance between the two. And also looking at certain things like promotion ROI, what promotions are profitable, what promotions are not profitable. So the first step, the price setting, how large is the overall cake that is being, or how much is the cake increased that's available for manufacturer and retailer, and in the second step, how should we split the cake between the two, or the improvement or the increase in the cake between the two. And of course here also, and I've seen a large variance between companies in this, in the pricing process, from a few weeks to half a year in companies like that. And this is, I think, for everyone involved, an important KPI to look at how much effort is it to actually implement a price round, a price change. If we look at a different industry, so for example, we're looking at a recurring revenue model, for example, software sales, where you acquire a customer and then that customer stays with the company for a few months or a few years, then you have a different set of specific KPIs. So the overall objective, long-term profit growth, might be the same, but if you then go into the details, you typically have KPIs covering the new customer acquisition. So what share of the customers that you address do you actually get? What's the average revenue per new customer? Do they all start with a small product? Do they start with a medium or the most expensive product? These are important. And then at a later stage, when a year or 2 years have passed and it's the customer needs to renew the contract, then important KPIs are, of course, the churn rate. So what share of your customers do you lose? Cross and upsell, are you able to move customers from a small plan to a medium or large plan, for example? And what's the average uplift in revenue you get from these customers? And of course, as we said in the beginning, there are always conflicts, for example, as in the Wells Fargo case that we mentioned, when companies have the objective to increase the number of new customers, and then there's an incentive to bring in poor customers. You have also here this interaction. So if you increase the take rate, this is often done at the cost, or this is often achieved by letting more customers in at a smaller plan, and these are more likely often to churn at a later stage. So if this one here does in the first level very well, but at a second glance not very well, it makes life for this second person here much more difficult. And the challenge for the organization, of course, is to balance that. And things like that are often done in pricing. And I think we don't have time to go into further detail, but the idea is often that to measure these things, companies try to introduce new KPIs. One typical candidate is something called pricing quality, and it tries to capture different things. If we go back here to this graph, so pricing quality would mean that you are able to get in new customers, but the proper customers, not customers that have a very high likelihood to then churn later on. And these things are companies try to capture in a number. And what it always comes down to is the question: how well can we model these relationships? So if a customer comes in at the beginning, what type of customer is it? Do we already have a chance to understand if this customer will be more likely to churn towards the end or not? And these things companies try to capture in these more sophisticated KPIs, pricing quality, pricing maturity for the company, and so on. And I think this is something difficult for us. I think the key answer to these things is that the core of the challenge is always the organization needs to understand the relationships between, and this brings us back to the initial questions, what's the relationship between actions, what you do, how you change prices and so on, and what are the results. And if you understand this relationship better, for example, with technology, where you're able to model how different customers, for example, behave throughout the life cycle, and this allows you to predict how they will churn or increase their sales 1 or 2 years down the road. This helps you define proper KPIs, and this is what we're doing at Buynomics. And I think looking at the watch, I will leave it to that, and we'll maybe go into more details at a later webinar. I think for us today, the objective was to give an overview on the topic, what are the challenges. We provided the framework that we'll share afterwards. And I think the core idea, I think the main takeaway is this relationship between actions, results, and how to measure the proper things. And to measure the proper things, it's important to understand how these actions, a price increase, relates to the outcome sales across a portfolio. And to do that well, you need to have a proper model that links these actions with the results. Thanks. I'll skip, Paul, I'll skip the demo tile. I think you took too long in the beginning with the question.
Yeah, it was all. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Feel free to ask them in the chat or in the Q&A. Someone's asking in the Q&A, what do you think are the most important KPIs to measure? I guess, what are the top 5 KPIs? We didn't mention any in the first question, so if you want to chime in.
Yeah, I think the top level KPIs are in pricing always sales, profit, and revenue. And then what drives these is really context specific. As we showed in the 2 examples in the recurring business, for example, it's take rate, churn, and so on. We gave this example in the consumer goods example. It is much more about the split between manufacturer and retailer and how you increase overall profit or overall revenue across the product portfolio. So the top levels, sales, revenue, profit, we always have in pricing. And below that, this is really industry specific.
Okay. I think that was actually it in terms of questions this time. So looks like we addressed everything quite well. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Ingo. We have another webinar coming up on the ugly truth about price elasticities. It's in 2 weeks. So tune in if you're interested in learning more about that. Also follow us on LinkedIn if you aren't already, to stay in touch with our latest events and insights that we post there, and reach out to us, of course, if you want to learn more about Buynomics. Wishing everyone a happy weekend and looking forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good weekend. See
Bye-bye.
you soon. Bye.